podcast on theme versus thematic issues. This one is best followed after watching our first podcast on what is theme and why does it matter and how do I find it, because oftentimes students tend to confuse what we see as theme, which is the lesson that the author is trying to share with us about life, and the idea of thematic issues. So we wanted to give a little bit more depth on the idea of what is a thematic issue, why do they matter, and how to use them to help us deduce what theme is. So here we go. First off, let's remember what theme is. Theme, as we have defined it in our classes, is the idea of the author's comment on the human condition. So this is the lesson that the author is trying to teach all of humanity through his or her work. So the way we like to talk about it is the idea of what are we supposed to learn from this text? How are we supposed to become better people after we have experienced this text? What are we supposed to learn from the characters when they make mistakes? What are we supposed to learn when somebody overcomes a difficult setting? And so to put it in another way, theme is what the author wants to teach all of us through their text. It's not just the tall kids or the short kids or the men or the women or the rich kids or the poor kids. What is the lesson that the author is trying to teach all of humanity? What can we all benefit from when we read this text? Or what does the author want to say about being human? Perhaps that being human is really hard. Perhaps that we're going to have to buck up sometimes and work really hard. Or that we're going to have to meet and understand other people so that we can become better ourselves. Again, theme is the idea of a universal lesson taught through the text that we are seeing or reading. And so why is theme important? Theme is why people read literature. This is why we read or view texts that are set in difficult settings for characters. Most likely, we're not going to find ourselves in these difficult environments. We're not going to find ourselves in a fantasy land where we have to deliver a ring in order to save the world, or where we have to defeat a Voldemort in order to improve the world and ourselves. But we can learn from those texts about ourselves. Since we're not going to be there ourselves, we can learn vicariously through the characters, through the setting, through their change, so that we can apply it to our own lives as real human beings in the real world. We're not going to be there, but we can still take some lesson away from that text as we learn and live through that text. That's what theme is. And ultimately, we are looking for theme to be stated in some sort of a sentence or a phrase. Something like, the text is teaching us to do something. The text is teaching us to not do something. And so how do we find theme? Because oftentimes authors don't leave a footnote at the back page that says, footnote, by the way, you should have learned that blank. So we have to do some digging and some searching for it. And so if you've seen our other theme podcast, this looks very familiar. We find theme through all of the literary devices that authors often use to help implant that theme or that message that they're trying to send. So we might look at characters and how they do or do not change. What is the author trying to teach us when Darth Vader does not change? What are we supposed to learn from Megamind when he does change and grow, despite all of the crazy things that he once believed? What are we supposed to learn in a difficult setting when the characters do overcome a desert or an isolated planet or a spaceship left out in the vast reaches of space? What are we supposed to learn through point of view when the story is told through an unreliable narrator? What are we supposed to learn when it's told from the point of view of a child who then grows up and learns along the way? All of those lit terms. What are we supposed to learn when the author continues to reference patriotic songs? What are we supposed to learn when they continue to reference Christian imagery throughout a text? And then the point of today, what are we supposed to learn when a thematic issue in a text is the idea of family or conflict or coming of age? So that's what we wanted to explore a little bit more deeply today. So this is where theme and thematic issues differ. Theme is kind of the end. This is what we're searching for. Thematic issues is another way that authors try to push us toward figuring out that lesson. Or another way, they are a means to that end. We define thematic issues as topics that are in the texts. And so oftentimes students hear theme and thematic issue, and they think they're the same thing. And we don't see them the same way in our classes. We see theme as some sort of statement about life, some sort of lesson they're trying to teach us through the texts. But we see thematic issues as another one of those ways through which theme is taught. For example, family, love, conflict. One-word statements, one-word items that authors use to teach us theme through. The theme of a story is not love, but they may use love to teach us a lesson. A theme is not family, but they may use a construction of family to teach us a lesson through. So let's go ahead and look at these thematic issues in a little bit more depth and see how they are not ends, they are means to the end of figuring out a lesson, which is theme. Family. Many texts use families to teach the lessons, but the lesson is not family. They're using the different configurations of family to teach us something about ourselves and about our world. The text could have a very traditional family, one husband, one wife, children, all living under the same roof. These families may not be traditional. There may be a single parent involved. There may be a divorcing situation. There may be two same-sex parents at home. There could be the idea of a non-related family, where we have this idea of just kind of a tribe, a group of people who work together to raise children or to better the world in some way. And so the theme is not family, but the author is certainly using family to teach us a lesson. And so some questions to consider. What does the text teach us when a family is really, really dysfunctional, but the main character somehow rises above that to do good? What does it tell us when the protagonist rejects that family to try life on his or her own? What does it tell us when the protagonist must get his family's help to solve that problem? Again, the theme is not going to be family. The theme might be something like family is your best support system, or family can make us better, and so we might want to protect the idea of the family. Or the theme might be that family can come in many different structures, so we shouldn't overlook those who aren't related, but could support us nonetheless. Now, a great example of this is the film Little Miss Sunshine. In that text, Olive's family is pretty dysfunctional. We have a divorce, remarry situation. We have an uncle who has tried to kill himself. We have a brother who is trying to get into the Air Force Academy, but he turns out to be colorblind. We have a grandfather who doesn't do very much other than try to get high on heroin. Here, the family is trying to get little Olive to the Little Miss Sunshine pageant. And throughout the entire movie, we see all the crazy things that go on with this family while stuck in a VW bus on their way to the pageant. But little Olive, that's whose story we're following. Does she rise above this and achieve her goals? She does. And so that teaches us a lesson through Olive dealing with her family. So again, the theme is not family. The thematic issue is family, but we're able to put that together with changes in character, with the setting of the tiny bus, with the hero's journey of going to the pageant. And we're able to see how Olive rises above her own family to achieve her goals. So there's a great example of how the thematic issue of family can then teach us a lesson, which is theme. Many texts use the thematic issue of love in order to help teach the lesson. And so we have to look at love and go, what are the different levels? Is it between spouses? Is it between parents and their children? Is it between friends? How does this text define love? So then we look at the questions associated with the thematic issue of love. What does it teach us when predictable patterns of love and mating exist? What does it teach us when an unlikely pair falls in love? What does it teach us when a seemingly perfect couple ends up in a breakup? So we have to look at the thematic issue that the text is using and ask ourselves, how does this teach us a lesson? Many texts use the thematic issue of conflict to advance their theme. And conflict could come in many forms. It could just be a simple disagreement, or it could be something much bigger, as in a war setting. It could also be an internal self-conflict. And so what does the text teach us when a war that this text is set in is being fought for the wrong reasons or for poor reasons? What happens in a text when a soldier questions that war? What happens when an underdog wins? So when we have stories, their theme is not that of conflict, but authors may use the thematic issue of conflict to teach us a lesson. A lot of times students look at the idea of coming of age as a thematic issue, and many texts use this as a thematic issue to reveal theme. Now, coming of age could mean growing up chronologically, like we actually watch somebody grow up from a younger person to an older person. But it could also be growing up metaphorically, somebody who's relatively immature becoming more mature. What does it teach us when a child overcomes conflict while growing up? A child learns important life lessons while growing up. Or an adult learns about him or herself and improves him or herself. Take the classic text of To Kill a Mockingbird. Many people look at that text and say the theme is coming of age. We would disagree. The author uses coming of age to teach us a lesson, but the lesson itself is not just coming of age. I mean, people will grow up chronologically. That has to happen. People don't actually stop growing or become younger unless you're Benjamin Button or something like that. Therefore, what are we supposed to learn when Scout grows up chronologically, but also grows up metaphorically? She sees the world around her. Instead of a world of childish things like rolling the tire down the street or antagonizing this creepy house with Boo Radley in it, what does it teach us when she grows up and sees the harsh realities of racism in the Tom Robinson trial? What does it teach us when she sees that Boo Radley, a person she'd never met before, turns out to be a really swell guy? The thematic issue is coming of age. You have a character who is growing up. But the theme is more than just that. What are we supposed to learn from Scout coming of age? What are we supposed to learn from Bob Ewell, who never really seems to grow up and continues to be a racist jerk throughout the entire text? A classic thematic issue is the idea of good versus evil. This kind of goes with the conflict thematic issue, that we kind of have to have opposing forces clashing in some sort of text, or nobody's going to read that. So questions come up like, how is good defined? How is evil defined? Whose definitions are employed? And then we have to look at that text and ask ourselves, what happens when the good guy defeats the bad guy? What's the lesson? Did we expect the good guy to win? What happens when a bad guy is really kind of good and the cop turns out to be bad? Think of the movie Training Day. What are we supposed to learn when the good guy wins, but he's a jerk doing it? Almost every text is going to have the thematic issue of good versus evil because we have to have conflict. But the theme is not good versus evil. We are supposed to learn a lesson while good battles evil. And then a final thematic issue that kind of lumps into that good versus evil or conflict one is the idea of overcoming adversity. That is the thematic issue, but that is not the lesson. The lesson is derived from when we look at this and go, what happens when the character does achieve his or her goal? What does it teach us when the character does not achieve his or her goal? And we also have to look at, where is that adversity coming from? Is it the character's own self? Is it another character, as in perhaps a foil pair? Is it society as a whole? What does it teach us when the protagonist achieves an easy goal? What does it teach us when the protagonist achieves a very, very difficult goal, or the protagonist fails to achieve any goal? And so to review, thematic issues are one-word statements about what is going on in a text, but those are not theme. These thematic issues, just like all the lit terms we might study, or point of view, or setting, or characters and their change, all of these combine to help give us clues as to what the author is trying to say and to teach us through the lesson of theme. These thematic issues are not theme in themselves, but they help reveal the theme. So again, a theme can't be family or war, but we can learn about ourselves, about our world, about what it means to be human through that family in that text, or through that soldiers dealing with war. That is the point. that thematic issues teach us the theme. So that's it. Ideally, from here on, we can keep theme and thematic issues a little bit more clear. And one final time, theme is the lesson that the author is trying to teach to the world, that universal lesson that should be applicable to everyone in the world. And it's usually in the form of some sort of statement, like, we should do this, or we should not do that. And this is going to differ from the thematic issues, those one-word topics that texts are written around. War, conflict, family. Those are thematic issues, and through them, they help reveal the lesson or the theme of a text. As always, thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, please bring those in and we'll take care of them. Otherwise, thanks, and we'll see you soon.